In the heart of a bustling city, where modern life pulsates with energy and secrets lurk in shadowy alleys, dwells Mabel, the enigmatic Wicker Witch. For decades, she's defied the natural order, outwitting death and the fates with her dark magic. But now, death, a relentless shadowy figure, closes in, weaving through the city's vibrant chaos in a tireless hunt for her soul. In a world where every shadow could conceal her nemesis and every knock on the door could signal the end, Mabel navigates a life of isolation, magic and fear. Her journey is one of suspense and mystery, culminating in an unexpected encounter that challenges her understanding of life, death, and the price of immortality. Will the Wicker Witch outsmart death once more, or will the fates finally claim what is rightfully theirs? Dive into eternal shadows of the Urban Labyrinth and unravel the thrilling story of magic, morality, and a chase through the endless twists of a modern city. In the heart of the city, where the neon lights flicker against the backdrop of towering skyscrapers and the clamour of urban life never ceases, there lies a narrow, forgotten street. Westwood Street, they call it, a place where time seems to stand still amidst the ever-changing cityscape. It is here, in a quaint, vine-encased house, that Mabel resides, an enigma in the midst of modernity. Mabel is no ordinary elderly lady. To the few who know of her, she is whispered about in hushed tones as the Wicker Witch, a title bestowed upon her not out of affection, but a mix of fear and respect. Her hair, white as the first snow of winter, cascades down her shoulders, framing a face marked by time, yet bearing an ageless gaze. Her eyes, piercing and wise, hold stories untold, secrets of a life that stretches far beyond the usual human span. Her story is one woven into the very fabric of the city's history. Decades ago, Mabel was renowned for her mastery of ancient arts, a knowledge passed down through generations, now lost to the world. She was a healer, a guide, and to some, a sage. But her true power lay in her exceptional skill with wicker magic, a rare form of witchcraft that allowed her to manipulate life forces and the natural order. It was this power that drew the attention of the fates, the ethereal beings who govern life and death, weaving the destiny of every soul. Mabel, in her relentless pursuit of knowledge and power, dared to challenge the fates. She sought to control her destiny, to extend her life beyond its natural course. The fates, intrigued by this mortal's audacity, presented her with a challenge, a riddle wrapped in the mysteries of the universe. If Mabel could unravel this riddle, she would be granted the boon she sought. However, the fates, in their cryptic nature, had crafted a riddle that was almost impossible to solve, a puzzle intertwined with the very essence of life and death. Mabel, with her profound understanding of the natural world and the arcane, delved deep into her studies. She toiled day and night, her determination unwavering, and then, against all odds, she did it. She unraveled the riddle, revealing a hidden loophole in the tapestry of fate. Utilizing her wicker magic, Mabel wove a new thread into her life tapestry, a thread indistinguishable from the others yet uniquely hers. This thread masked her presence from death, making her seem like a shadow, a whisper of existence that death could not grasp. From that moment, she became the Wicker Witch, a symbol of defiance against the natural order. But such a victory came at a cost. She gained years, decades, even centuries, but with each passing day, the burden of her extended life grew heavier. Loneliness became her constant companion as she watched the world change, leaving her a relic of a bygone era. And now, death, having discovered the deceit, roams the city. A shadowy figure, relentless and unforgiving, he seeks to reclaim what is rightfully his. Mabel feels his presence drawing near, an ominous chill that seeps into her bones. As she sits in her old creaky chair, surrounded by ancient tomes and relics of her past, Mabel knows the game has begun, a game of hide and seek, where the stakes are her very soul. She prepares her magic, the ancient wicker spells that have protected her for so long, but this time she wonders if they will be enough. For in the heart of the city, where life pulsates with relentless vigor, the eternal shadows of the Urban Labyrinth whisper of a looming confrontation, a confrontation between the inevitability of death and the defiant will of the Wicker Witch. Ah, my dear nocturnal scholars of the macabre, it's time for a quick scare break. As we linger in these shadowy realms, a small favour I dare to ask. If my tales of terror bring you thrills, do not let our journey end here. Hit like, subscribe, and join our dark congregation. Now shall we delve deeper into the abyss. Let's embrace the darkness once more. Let's get back to the shadows. As the dawn breaks over the city, casting a golden hue on the high-rise buildings, Mabel sits by her window, her gaze lost in the labyrinth of streets below. The city wakes up to its usual rhythm, the hum of traffic, the distant sound of people starting their day. But for Mabel, each day dawns with a growing weariness, a fatigue that seeps deep into her bones. For decades, Mabel has lived with the constant fear of death's arrival. This fear has turned her once curious eyes into wary, suspicious ones. Every shadow that passes her window, every stranger who lingers a little too long near her door, could be death, cunningly disguised, waiting to claim her. Her life, prolonged beyond its natural course, now feels like a relentless vigil, an endless watch for a foe as inevitable as time itself. This perpetual state of vigilance has left Mabel drained. The vibrant energy that once fueled her magic and her defiance against the fates has diminished, leaving a tiredness that no amount of rest can cure. Yet, it is not just the weariness of the body that weighs on her, it is the weariness of the soul. A soul that yearns for rest, for release, but is held back by the primal fear of what lies beyond life. Her isolation, once a choice to focus on her craft, has now become a necessity, a means to protect herself from the ever-looming presence of death. She trusts no one, for anyone could be an agent of her inevitable end. This loneliness has turned her home into a sanctuary and a prison. One afternoon, as Mabel ventures out for her rare walk in the park, her eyes catch a figure sitting alone on a bench. The figure, a man in a dark coat, seems to watch her with an intensity that sends a shiver down her spine. His eyes, dark and unfathomable, remind her of the endless void she imagines death to possess. Her heart races, her steps falter, and for a moment, she is convinced that death has finally come for her, disguised as this solitary stranger. Mustered by a mix of fear and a resolve not to flee, Mabel approaches the man, her hands subtly weaving signs of protection, her mind bracing for a confrontation. But as she nears, the man simply smiles, a warm, human smile, and turns back to his book. In that instant, Mabel realizes her mistake. This man is just another soul engrossed in his own life story, unaware of the turmoil he inadvertently caused. The relief Mabel feels is fleeting, quickly replaced by a profound sense of sadness. This encounter is a stark reminder of her plight. She has become a shadow in a world full of life, unable to connect, to trust, to belong. Every face hides a potential threat, every gesture a possible deceit. As Mabel returns to her home, the weight of her loneliness feels heavier than ever. The walls of her house, adorned with relics of her past, seemed to close in on her. In her quest for immortality, she has traded the warmth of human connection for a cold, unending vigil. The city outside continues its relentless pace, indifferent to the plight of the Wicker Witch within its heart. Mabel sits by her window once more, watching the world go by, a world she can observe but no longer touch. Her heart, once filled with the fire of defiance, now echoes with the hollow sound of her own solitude. Chapter 3. The Unexpected Visitors. The day had settled into a quiet afternoon, with the sun casting long shadows across the streets of the city. Inside her time-worn house, Mabel sat in her usual chair, her eyes occasionally drifting towards the window, vigilant as always. The world outside felt both close and distant, a reality she could see but not partake in. Suddenly, her reverie was broken by a knock at the door. The sound was gentle, almost hesitant, but to Mabel, it was a thunderclap in the silence of her solitude. Her heart skipped a beat, and her mind raced with possibilities. Could this be the moment she had dreaded for so long? Could death have finally come, cloaked in the guise of a visitor? With a hand that trembled ever so slightly, Mabel moved towards the door. She paused, her ear pressed against the wood, listening. There were voices, soft and friendly, but Mabel trusted neither softness nor friendliness. "We're from the Neighborhood Care Initiative," said a cheerful voice. "We're checking on residents in the area to see if anyone needs assistance. Is everything all right in there?" Mabel's grip on the doorknob tightened. She knew of no such initiative. Was this a ruse, a clever ploy by death to lure her out? Her voice, when she finally spoke, was laced with suspicion. "Who sent you? Are you really who you say you are?" The visitors seemed taken aback by her tone. "We're just volunteers," the voice replied, a hint of concern creeping in. "We're here to help, that's all. Do you need any groceries? Or maybe some medication?" Mabel's mind raced. The conversation felt too normal, too mundane. It was exactly how death would approach, she thought, under the guise of banal kindness, hiding his true intentions beneath a veneer of benevolence. "You're not fooling me," Mabel retorted, her voice rising with a mix of fear and defiance. "I know what you're after. You've come for me, haven't you? Your death." There was a pause, and then a murmur of confusion among the visitors. "Ma'am, we assure you, we're just here to help the community. There's no need to be afraid." But Mabel was not convinced. Her entire being was on edge, her senses heightened to every sound, every shift in the air. She couldn't risk it, couldn't risk opening the door, not when she was so close to being found. "I don't need your help," Mabel said firmly, her voice steadier now with her resolve. "Please, just leave me be." There was a moment of silence, and then the sound of footsteps retreating. Mabel waited, her breath held, until the sound of their departure was certain. Only then did she allow herself to step away from the door, her heart still pounding in her chest. The encounter left her shaken. She had survived this time, but for how long? How many more knocks would there be? And how would she know when it was truly death standing on the other side? As night fell over the city, Mabel sat alone in her house, the silence more profound than before. The visit had been a stark reminder of her isolation, of the life she had chosen in her quest to evade death. But as she pondered her solitude, a small, nagging thought crept into her mind. What if they had been just what they claimed to be? Helpers, nothing more. The thought was quickly dismissed, overshadowed by years of fear and suspicion. Mabel couldn't afford such risks, not when she had come so far, not when she was so close to losing it all. The night deepened, and the Wicker Witch sat in her fortress of solitude, a prisoner of her own making, waiting for the next knock, the next test, in the eternal game of cat and mouse with her inescapable fate. Chapter 4. Mabel had always chosen the quietest hours for her walks in the park, when the paths were nearly empty, and the world seemed to pause briefly from its relentless pace. She wrapped a scarf around her face, not just for warmth, but for anonymity, a shield from prying eyes that might recognize the infamous Wicker Witch. The park, with its ancient trees and winding paths, had always been a place of solace for Mabel, a brief escape from the confines of her home and her fears. But today, her sanctuary would be breached in a way she had not anticipated. As she strolled along a secluded path, lost in her thoughts, two men emerged suddenly from the shadows of the trees. Their intentions were clear and menacing. "Money now," they demanded, their voices harsh and threatening. Mabel, despite her age and seemingly fragile appearance, was not defenseless. She was a witch, possessing powers that had not been seen in the modern world. With a surge of adrenaline, she raised her arms, her fingers moving through the air, weaving a spell of protection. A shimmering barrier materialized between her and her assailants, stopping them in their tracks. For a moment, the men were taken aback, their faces a mix of confusion and fear, but Mabel's strength was not what it once was. The effort of summoning the barrier quickly drained her, and her arms trembled under the strain. Seizing the opportunity, one of the men pushed through the weakening barrier and shoved Mabel to the ground with a rough hand. The other, emboldened by his companion's action, kicked her, his boot landing with a sickening thud against her side. Pain seared through Mabel's body, her breath coming in short gasps. She felt her consciousness slipping, her vision blurring. In that moment of despair, a new voice cut through the air. "Stop that!" A man came running towards them, his voice filled with authority and outrage. The attackers, startled by the sudden intervention, hesitated. Seeing their chance slipping away, they turned and fled into the cover of the trees. The man reached Mabel, kneeling beside her with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, gently helping her to sit up. Mabel, still reeling from the attack, could only nod weakly. Without hesitation, the stranger helped Mabel to her feet and supported her as they walked slowly back towards her home. He was a complete stranger, yet there was a kindness in his eyes that reminded Mabel of a world she had long ago turned her back on. As they reached her house, Mabel hesitated at the door. This man, her unexpected savior, was now at the threshold of her sanctuary. She looked at him, a mix of gratitude and wariness in her eyes. After years of isolation and fear, trusting a stranger was not easy for her. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." The man smiled gently, a reassuring presence in the midst of her turmoil. "It's all right. I'm just glad I could help. Be careful, okay?" As he turned to leave, Mabel watched him go, a myriad of emotions swirling within her. The encounter had left her shaken, not just by the violence she had faced, but by the unexpected kindness of a stranger. For the first time in many years, Mabel felt a flicker of connection, a reminder that even in her self-imposed exile, humanity could still reach her in unexpected ways. The door closed behind her, and Mabel leaned against it, her body aching, her heart a tumult of feelings. The solitude of her home felt more profound than ever, a stark contrast to the brief touch of human kindness she had just experienced. In the fading light of the day, the Wicker Witch pondered her existence, the path she had chosen, and the unexpected moments that still had the power to touch her weary soul. Chapter 5. An Unexpected Visitor and Philosophical Reflections. The morning after the harrowing incident in the park, Mabel's world, which had long been shrouded in solitude and suspicion, was once again disturbed by a knock at her door. A voice called from the other side. "Hello, it's Steve from yesterday. Just checking to make sure you're okay." Mabel, still nursing the aches from her assault, hesitated. Opening her door to the outside world was something she hadn't done in years, but Steve's voice, tinged with genuine concern, nudged her to break her long-held practice. She slowly unlatched the door and opened it to see Steve standing there, his expression one of kind concern. "Oh, thank you, young man," she said, her voice trembling slightly. As she spoke, a wave of weakness overcame her, her body still recovering from the trauma. She began to fall, but Steve was quick to catch her, his arm steady and reassuring. "Can I help?" Steve asked, his tone gentle. "Yes. Come in and put me on the couch. I'll be okay," Mabel managed to say, her pride battling with her need for assistance. Steve carefully helped her to the couch, his movements considerate and respectful of her frailty. Once she was settled, he moved to the kitchen, returning shortly with a cup of tea for her, its steam curling gently into the air. As they sat, an unusual conversation unfolded between them. Mabel, who had been so long isolated from human contact, found herself opening up to this stranger. She spoke of her tiredness, a weariness that went beyond the physical, touching on the deep exhaustion of a soul that had lived far beyond its natural time. "I'm tired, Steve," she confessed, her voice a mere whisper, "but I'm scared too." Steve listened intently, his eyes reflecting a depth of understanding. Then he spoke. He talked about the futility of living forever, how a life extended beyond its natural course loses its meaning and purpose. Living forever might seem like a gift, but it's a curse in disguise. A life without end is a life without the urgency to achieve, to create, to love, to live. It becomes a stagnant pond rather than a flowing river. The value of life lies in its finiteness, in the knowledge that our time is limited, which pushes us to make the most of it. Mabel listened, the words resonating within her, stirring thoughts and feelings long suppressed. Steve's perspective offered a stark contrast to her own life choices, challenging the very foundation of her prolonged existence. The afternoon sun began to fade, casting long shadows across the room. Steve remained there, a comforting presence in her house of solitude. Mabel, for the first time in many years, did not feel alone. His words lingered in the air, a gentle challenge to her long-held beliefs, a whisper of a different way of living, even in the twilight of her life. As the chapter closes, Steve is still in her room, a symbol of the outside world and new perspectives that had intruded into her secluded life. The encounter, brief as it might be, had opened a window in Mabel's soul, letting in a sliver of light, of hope, and perhaps a hint of reconciliation with the life she had so fiercely clung to. Chapter 6. The final encounter. Steve stood up from his seat beside the couch, his expression serene yet resolute. "It's time to go, Mabel," he said softly. Mabel looked up at him, a flicker of realization dawning in her eyes. "It's you, isn't it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Steve replied, his voice gentle yet unwavering. "I am death. I have searched for you for many years." Mabel absorbed his words, a mix of fear, relief, and resignation washing over her. Steve, or rather, Death, explained how he had finally found her in a moment of extreme need, not for herself, but for another. It was her act of vulnerability, her acceptance of help from Steve in the park, that allowed him to finally reach her. "You see, Mabel, I couldn't have just come in without your invitation. Your magic and your wiles have kept me at bay for so long. But in the park, when you were in need and you accepted my help. You invited me in, not just into your home, but into your life. He spoke of the fates and how even they could no longer hold her thread. The thread of your life has been stretched far beyond its natural length. The fates, they can hold it no longer. It's time for you to find peace. Mabel listened, the fight and fear slowly draining from her. Death's presence was not as she had imagined all these years. There was a kindness in his eyes, a promise of something beyond the life she had clung to so desperately. There's no need to worry, Death assured her. I will be with you, just as I was in the park. I am not just an end, Mabel, but a transition, a journey to whatever lies beyond. With those words, Mabel felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a burden she had carried for far too long. She nodded slowly, accepting the inevitable with a newfound sense of peace. Together, they walked towards the door. As they passed through, Mabel's frail, time-worn body remained on the couch, a serene expression on her face. Her spirit, however, walked hand in hand with death, stepping out into a new unknown, free from the constraints of her prolonged life. The scene closed with the door gently shutting behind them, marking the end of Mabel's earthly journey and the beginning of something new and mysterious. The Wicker Witch's story, a tale of magic, fear, and the pursuit of immortality, had come to a close, leaving behind a legacy of lessons about the natural order of life and death. Thank you for joining me on this chilling journey. If your thirst for the unknown and the unexplained is still unquenched, I invite you to delve deeper into the abyss of terror. Just beyond the veil of reality, another story awaits to send shivers down your spine. Dare to join me in the next video, where the unknown becomes known and the unseen seen. Until then, keep the lights dim and your mind open. This is Professor Shadow, signing off.